It is not easy to pick a singular tipping point to narrate the history of the brutal conflict of the Israel-Palestine war. Depending on whom you ask and where you ask, the retelling of this heart-wrenching story of bloodshed and displacement will change drastically. Given the recent war between the state of Israel and Hamas, emotions are raging and opinions seem skewed. One thing is clear: hundreds of innocent civilians are dead. In this video, we're going to break down the origins of the conflict objectively. Let's get started. What's happening today? The recent escalation between Hamas and Israel is unprecedented. What we are witnessing today is being dubbed as the most violent offensive launched by Hamas on October 7, 2023. Militants and paramilitary groups from Gaza stormed the fortified border between the city and the state of Israel. It is still unclear when and how Hamas planned the attack, but regardless, the offensive was effective. By the looks of it, militants planned on destroying the fence that had kept the city of Gaza completely isolated from Israel or Palestine. Many sources cite that Israel's blockade of Gaza had made the city the world's largest open-air prison. Non-governmental organizations like the UN have railed hard for the citizens of Gaza who live in extreme poverty, food and water insecurity, as well as in a constant state of war. All hell broke loose when Hamas fighters didn't encounter a strong defense from the Israeli military. Surprisingly, when the militants began to attack the border near Mefalsim, Israeli forces were nowhere to be found. Now, this is extremely shocking. The Israeli government has spent billions of dollars to secure the border or the Gaza blockade. This so-called highly sophisticated fence seemed powerless in front of Hamas's manually operated excavators. As soon as the Hamas fighters stormed the border, citizens of Israel began to flee. While there is no confirmed source that can back up the statistics, Israel claims that Hamas caused significant damage to the sanctity of life. According to Israeli authorities, Hamas gunmen killed more than 1,400 civilians and soldiers and also took at least 199 hostages to kickstart the negotiation process on removing the Gaza blockade. But the worst was yet to come. On the same day, Hamas fired thousands of rockets towards Israel as the first official act of war. The last time there was an escalation of events on the Gaza Strip, the year was 1948, and history books cite that instance as the first Arab-Israeli war. It is hard to pick one catalyst for the escalation between Israel and Hamas. Other than the catastrophic conditions around Gaza and Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Hamas offensive is rooted in a complicated history. So, what is the war actually about? Let's take a brief dive into the history of the heart-wrenching conflict. What happened in the past? To be fair, there are multiple entry points to explain the conflict. Some might even start their retelling of events starting from the Roman Empire or perhaps the massive wave of Jewish migration to the Ottoman Empire in the early 19th century. That's the timeline when Eastern Europe was complicit in driving Jews away from their homes into perpetual state of oppression and homelessness. But we're going to make a slight timeline jump to give clear context to the conflict's most origin and confusing entry point: the Balfour Declaration. In the aftermath of World War I, the British Empire mandated the Balfour Declaration to give Jews a national home in Palestine. After the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, at that time, Jews constituted less than 10% of the population in Palestine. After the mandate was approved, the British funded and facilitated a major wave of immigration of European Jews to Palestine. Years later, the Balfour Declaration became the basis of United Nations Resolution 181, which effectively divided Palestine into an Arab and Jewish land. The controversial decision to divide the territory led to Israelite groups to rally for an independent state by forcing more than 750,000 Palestinians out of their homes. The Palestinian population calls this event a mass exodus, or nabqa in Arabic, meaning catastrophe. In 1948, the modern state of Israel declared independence, which also marked the start of the First Israel-Arab War. The war only ended in 1949, after an armistice between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. There's a lot that happens afterwards, including a series of major and minor armed conflicts between the two parties. But there are two noteworthy events that precede the recent war between Israel and Palestine. Number 1, the creation of Hamas in 1987, and number 2, the indefinite blockade of Gaza in June 2007. Both of the events are actually correlated. Hamas, as a militant group, emerged from a peaceful, charitable Islamist society that played a critical role in resisting Israeli operations in Gaza. According to CNN, the group, like most Palestinian factions and political parties, insists that Israel is an occupying power and that it is trying to liberate the Palestinian territories. It considers Israel an illegitimate state and has called for its downfall. When Hamas took full control of the city in 2007, Israel fenced the strip to allegedly protect its citizens from terrorism, rocket attacks, and any other hostile activity. Operation Al-Aqsa Storm. Coming back to the present, we can see that the Gaza blockade is more than a security measure for Israel. Ever since 2007, agencies like the UN have questioned the legality of Israel's action under the international law. In fact, experts have called the complete siege on Gaza illegal and inhumane. According to Israel's perspective, the city is still being ruled by the militant Hamas, who are recognized as terrorists by major countries in the world like the US. As it stands today, one of the Hamas's motives to launch an attack on Israel is the Gaza blockade. And the other flashpoint in this war is, of course, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. To give you a bit of context, the mosque is considered to be the third holiest site by the Muslims, but for the Palestinian population, it is also a huge part of their national heritage. After the Six-Day War between the two parties in 1967, Israel annexed East Jerusalem. There are a lot of questions about the legality of the annexation, but the gravest contention is over the mosque. In particular, Jewish population believes that the compound of Al-Aqsa is the biblical location of their holy site, the Mount Temple. The historical complications have made the holy site a center of violence several times, but Hamas's tipping point was the infamous Ramadan raids in April 2023. For Muslims, the holy month of Ramadan is very sacred, so typically the Al-Aqsa Mosque is brimming with worshippers, more than the usual. Yet, in recent years, Israeli forces have made a routine to attack Muslim worshippers in the mosque for various reasons, a move that Hamas has violently criticized, and this year was no different. In April 2023, Israeli forces stormed into the mosque while many Palestinians were offering prayers. The electricity was cut off, and the horrifying videos from the raid showed Israeli officials striking the worshippers with batons. As per CNN and Al Jazeera, eyewitnesses had seen Israeli forces breaking windows and doors to enter the mosque, deploying grenades, and injuring worshippers with rubber bullets. In retaliation, the Palestinians opened fireworks at the forces and hurled stones at them. Investigations about the raids revealed that Israeli forces had attacked the worshippers as an act of self-preservation. According to CNN, Israeli police said in a statement that its forces entered Al-Aqsa after hundreds of rioters and mosque desecrators had barricaded themselves inside. When the police entered, stones were thrown at them, and fireworks were fired from inside the mosque by a large group of agitators. There is no reliable source to confirm Israel's claim. Even the most pro-Israel publications haven't reported anything conclusive about the incident. What we know is that such raids continued for a week until Israel completely banned the Muslims from entering the mosque. Instead, major factions of the Jewish population were given the tours of the holy site under strict police protection. Many Palestinians saw this as an unprecedented attack on their national and religious identity. On the other hand, Israel is also reclaiming a holy site that once belonged to them, according to the Bible, at least. The infamous Ramadan raid had prompted Hamas to curate a violent offensive against Israel months later. The militancy groups are calling it the Operation Al-Aqsa Storm, Operation Swords of Iran. It is not a surprise that Israel's response to Operation Al-Aqsa Storm is decisive and brutal. In fact, many journalists are calling it the state's most violent reaction to this date. Israel has dubbed its response as Operation Swords of Iran, and its main goal is to eradicate the presence of Hamas and other Islamist jihadist groups from Gaza. From October 7th to October 12th of 2023, the Israeli Defense Forces had dropped 6,000 bombs on the Gaza Strip, effectively killing hundreds and displacing thousands. By looking at recent events, Israel's defense is twofold. The government of Israel has asked 1.1 million citizens living in northern Gaza to evacuate the city as a ground invasion is imminent. At the same time, all routes to leave the city have been blocked by the Israeli military. The other response to Operation Al-Aqsa Storm is even a tighter siege on Gaza. Ever since Hamas's airstrikes towards Israel, the citizens of Gaza don't have access to food, water, medical supplies, fuel, and the internet. While the international community and NGOs have requested a safe passage for the civilians, the Israeli military doesn't seem to budge. To put it simply, the blockade of Gaza is a huge leverage point for both Israel and Hamas. The city gives the Hamas fighters an entry point into their enemy's territory. And for Israel, depriving Gazans of their fundamental rights is the most effective way to break Hamas's resistance. The IDF has stated that the attack on Gaza would continue until Hamas safely gives up 199 citizens it has allegedly kidnapped from the Mefalsim area. In response, Hamas is claiming that the IDF has killed at least 1,000 children during the span of brutal bombing and has kidnapped several others. Both sides are making grave allegations, but there are little to no mechanisms to fact-check them. In the meanwhile, the escalation has taken an even more violent turn as an unknown strike has killed at least 500 civilians at Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza City. The developing news sources are calling the event a massacre or a deadly day for the city. While the hospital bombing has inspired a new wave of worldwide protest against Israel, the investigations surrounding the event are still underway. As per Gaza's health ministry, the strike came from Israel. And as per IDF, the bombing was the result of a misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. The bottom line remains the same though. More than 500 civilians, including children, are dead. Even then, the escalation between Hamas and Israel hasn't toned down. In fact, at the same day, the IDF has announced that it is going to reorient even a bigger attack against the militancy. The Israeli military now wants to enter the decisive stage of the war. But of course, the matters are far from over. Despite its majority terrorist status, Hamas's offensive has a rapid support from Islamic stakeholders like Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and more. Not to mention, the US has warned Iraq against taking an active role in the conflict that ranges from funding the Palestinian Front or arming them. Such developments aren't new to the Middle East, and they often come with bad tidings. It's not surprising that the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has warned of an emerging regional crisis in the Middle East. In that case, the war between Israel and Hamas might turn more violent and bloody. And it is just the beginning. Found this video insightful? Give it a like and subscribe to the channel.